In an elite military academy, a small, timid boy dreams of becoming an army officer. But when older cadets mock his oversized camouflage uniform and humiliate him in front of the school, an elderly sweeper quietly steps in to defend him. The bullies laugh at the old man too, mocking his frail body, his mop, and his slow walk. Until the academy headmaster arrives, what happens next will shock everyone. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. Morning formation had barely ended when the courtyard began filling with cadets heading to their first classes of the day. Backpacks thudded against uniforms, boots clattered across the sidewalks, and the giant academy flag swayed in the breeze. Near the main entrance stood a small, timid boy with an oversized camouflage uniform that looked 2 sizes too big. The sleeves fell past his wrists, the boots swallowed his ankles, and the hat kept sliding sideways over his eyes. But the boy stood proudly, even nervously straightening his collar as if preparing for an inspection. His dream of becoming an officer shone in his eyes, unshaken by the weight of the uniform. That pride didn't last long. 3 older cadets approached him with the swagger of boys who had never been challenged. Their laughter hit him before their words did, sharp and mocking. One flicked the boy's hat off his head. Another grabbed his collar and shook him, taunting him for daring to dress like a real soldier. The third circled him slowly, calling him a wannabe, a toy soldier, a joke walking around in camouflage. The boy tried to explain, tried to steady his trembling voice, but the mocking only grew louder. Other cadets passing by glanced over but didn't interfere. Some pretended not to see, others smirked uncomfortably, and a few simply walked faster. The boy was shrinking into himself now, eyes down, shoulders collapsing as the bullies shoved him again. His dream, so strong a minute earlier, seemed to dim right there in the sunlight. Then a soft scraping sound approached from behind them, the slow drag of a mop across concrete. An elderly sweeper pushed a worn cart, his uniform faded from years of cleaning the same academy grounds. His white beard framed a lined face, and his movements were steady but tired, each step measured. The old man paused as he saw what was happening. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in recognition. He had seen this scene too many times in his life. He stepped forward and gently placed a hand between the boy and the bullies. His voice was quiet but firm as he told them to stop. He told them the uniform they mocked represented honor, respect, and sacrifice. He told them dreams were not something to crush. The bullies stared for a moment and then burst into laughter. They mocked his posture, his wrinkled face, the mop in his hand, the slow way he walked. One mimicked his limp just to get another round of laughter from the crowd forming around them. Students whispered, watching the scene unfold. The old man didn't react. He simply looked at the boy, offering a small, reassuring nod, and then the courtyard fell silent because the headmaster had just stepped outside and his eyes were locked on the old sweeper. The headmaster froze on the steps, his boots stopping mid-stride as his gaze locked onto the old sweeper. For a moment he didn't breathe. The cadets who had been laughing went silent instantly, confused by the way the headmaster's expression shifted, first surprise, then disbelief, and finally something none of them expected. Respect. Deep, unmistakable respect. But before anyone could understand what was happening, the bullying continued. The headmaster hadn't yet spoken, and the older cadets assumed he hadn't seen enough to intervene. One of them shoved the small boy again, knocking him back against the wall. The old sweeper stepped forward with surprising firmness, placing himself between the boy and the bullies. His hands trembled slightly from age, but his stance was steady, shoulders squared like someone who had once stood in much harsher places than a school courtyard. The bullies sneered at him again. One grabbed the mop from his cart and spun it like a toy rifle. Another pointed at his faded work uniform and mocked him loudly, calling him the weakest man on campus. The third leaned in close, asking why someone so old and useless even had the right to speak in a military academy. Their voices echoed off the walls as more cadets gathered, sensing something was unfolding, but unsure which way it would go. The small boy clung to the old sweeper's sleeve, not with fear but with a kind of desperate hope. He didn't know who this man was, only that someone had finally stood up for him. The old sweeper gave the boy a small nod, then looked back toward the bullies. His eyes carried decades of storms, battles, and burdens no one there could imagine. The bullies continued their taunts, now louder, braver, feeding off each other's cruelty. One of them stepped forward, poking the old man in the chest. The crowd gasped. The old sweeper didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood like an unshakable pillar. Then behind them a sharp voice split the air. The headmaster called the courtyard to immediate attention. Every cadet snapped upright, all except the older bullies who froze halfway between arrogance and panic. The headmaster's boots struck the ground in a strict, controlled rhythm as he walked toward the group. Students parted silently as he passed, their eyes wide. He stopped directly in front of the old sweeper. The bullies waited for an explosion of anger, expecting the headmaster to discipline the old man for interfering. Instead, something no one expected happened. The headmaster's posture changed. His spine straightened. His jaw tightened. His expression transformed into one of reverence so deep it sent chills across the crowd. Without hesitation, he lifted his hand and delivered a formal, razor-sharp salute directly to the old sweeper. The courtyard went dead silent. The bullies' mouths fell open. The small boy stared in disbelief. Every cadet in the courtyard felt the air shift as if history itself had just stepped into the hallway with them. And then, in a voice heavy with emotion, the headmaster addressed the old sweeper with a title none of the watching students had ever heard spoken on campus, not in years, not in decades. A title that explained everything, a title that would change everything. The courtyard seemed to tilt as the headmaster's voice spoke a title that no one at the academy had heard spoken since before most of them were born. The older cadets staggered back a step, unsure if they had misheard, but the stunned silence of the crowd confirmed they hadn't. The old sweeper lowered his eyes as if the past he had hidden for decades had finally caught up with him. The headmaster's breath trembled as he explained that the man standing before them had once been one of the academy's greatest soldiers. A graduate who went on to serve in places the cadets had only read about in textbooks, who had shed blood on foreign soil, saved men under impossible circumstances, and carried burdens heavier than any backpack or rifle they'd ever touched. Gasps spread through the courtyard as the headmaster described missions long classified, tales whispered by instructors in private, and acts of courage that bordered on legend. The bullies shrank where they stood, their arrogance evaporating into fear as they realized they had mocked a man the academy had built monuments for. The small boy stared up at the old sweeper in awe, clutching the sleeve of his oversized uniform. The old man gently placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, offering silent reassurance that none of this attention mattered to him. But the headmaster was not finished. He turned his fierce gaze on the bullies and demanded they explain themselves. Their stuttering excuses fell apart instantly, their voices shaking as they stumbled through half apologies. The headmaster cut them off sharply, ordering them to stand at rigid attention. His voice thundered across the courtyard as he declared that disrespect toward anyone, but especially toward a veteran, would never be tolerated on academy grounds. The bullies stood pale-faced, practically trembling, as the headmaster announced severe disciplinary action. Cadets around them watched in disbelief, realizing how close the bullies had come to crossing a line that could have ended their future. Meanwhile, the old sweeper quietly stepped aside from the spotlight, but the headmaster insisted he stay. He turned to the gathering students and told them that the boy they mocked for wearing a big uniform had more courage in his small frame than many had in their entire bodies. The young cadet blinked, stunned, as the headmaster encouraged him to stand proud and keep chasing his dream. Tears filled the boy's eyes, not from fear, but from validation he never expected. The headmaster then requested the old sweeper to speak. The courtyard held its breath as the veteran stepped forward slowly. He looked at the crowd, not with arrogance, not with pride, but with gentleness. And when he finally opened his mouth, his first words cut through the silence with the weight of a lifetime. He too had once been the smallest boy in this school, wearing a uniform far too big for him, mocked by boys who thought strength came from size. But it was courage, he said, that made a soldier, not height, not muscle, not rank. And courage could start in even the smallest heart. Should I continue with part 4? A stillness swept through the courtyard as the old veteran's words settled into every corner of the academy grounds, reaching even the cadets who stood far at the back. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of battles fought, losses endured, and years spent carrying memories no young soldier could yet comprehend. He spoke of the day he first stepped into this same academy decades ago, wearing a uniform that hung off his shoulders just like the one the small boy wore now. He recounted standing in the same courtyard, terrified to speak, afraid to fail, and mocked by those who believed strength came from loud voices and big fists. But he said he learned quickly that a soldier's worth was measured not by appearance, but by heart, by the moments when fear tried to own you and you stood anyway. The younger cadets listened in awe, breathing quietly as if any sound would break the spell he cast. The older bullies shifted uncomfortably. Every word felt like a hammer striking the guilt inside them. The headmaster stood proudly, allowing the old man the space he deserved, his eyes reflecting heavy respect. The veteran continued, sharing a moment from his early service, his first mission, when he froze from fear while under fire. But instead of humiliation, his sergeant had placed a hand on his shoulder and said the same words he now spoke to the boy beside him. Courage is not about never being scared. It's about moving even when your legs shake." The small boy looked up, eyes wide, as the old man assured him that great soldiers are often born from those who felt like they didn't belong. He explained that years later, after proving himself, he returned to this very academy not as a hero, but as someone who wanted to protect the next generation from the pain he once felt. He pointed gently toward the bullies, not accusingly, but knowingly, telling them that every soldier must learn discipline, humility, and the responsibility of wearing a uniform. Their faces burned red, and for the first time since the incident began, they lowered their heads, not from fear of punishment, but from understanding. The headmaster stepped forward then, his voice strong and steady as he announced the official consequences. The bullies would be removed from afternoon training, placed under disciplinary supervision, and assigned service hours under the very man they had mocked. The crowd murmured, recognizing how fitting the punishment was. The old veteran gave a faint smile, shaking his head softly at the headmaster, not out of disagreement, but humility. He had never sought authority or revenge. The headmaster then turned back to the small boy, instructing him to stand at attention. The boy obeyed, shoulders back, chin up, though his heart pounded. The headmaster praised his bravery and told him that the academy needed cadets like him, young men who could rise after being pushed down. The entire courtyard erupted in applause, the sound rolling across the grounds like thunder. The old man placed a hand on the boy's back, guiding him gently through the crowd as cadets stepped aside. The bullies remained behind, waiting for their punishment, but something deeper had already shifted inside them. And as the veteran walked with the young cadet toward the school doors, it was clear the lesson was far from over. Should I continue with Part 5? The academy hallways felt different as the old veteran and the small boy walked side by side, the echo of applause still fading behind them. The boy's steps were firmer now, no longer timid, and the oversized uniform that once looked like a costume now seemed like the beginning of something real. The veteran guided him to a quiet corner of the school where sunlight fell through tall windows, illuminating dust particles like tiny stars floating around them. He leaned gently on his broom handle, not from weakness but from the weight of memories, and began telling the boy the part of the story he had never shared publicly, the part that shaped him more than any medal or mission. He described the night before his graduation from the academy, when he nearly quit out of fear that he would never measure up. He remembered packing his bag, ready to leave, when an instructor found him alone in the barracks. Instead of yelling at him, the instructor had quietly told him that even the strongest soldiers feel like running at some point, but true strength came from taking just one more step. And so he stayed. That single decision changed everything. The boy listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word like scripture. The veteran told him that weakness wasn't something to hide, it was the starting point of every great warrior. What mattered was the heart beating inside the uniform, not the size of the uniform itself. He lifted the boy's cap and placed it properly on his head, adjusting it with the same precision he once used on younger soldiers he had trained. As they walked back toward the courtyard, they saw the three bullies standing stiffly at attention, waiting with nervous tension. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by genuine remorse. The headmaster watched them silently, giving the veteran a chance to handle the moment as he saw fit. The bullies stepped forward hesitantly, eyes lowered, their voices cracked with discomfort as they apologized first to the veteran, acknowledging their disrespect, and then to the small boy, admitting their cruelty. The courtyard was quiet except for their trembling voices. The veteran didn't scold them. Instead, he reminded them that every soldier must carry himself with honor, not just on the battlefield, but in every hallway, every classroom, every moment someone weaker needed protection. He told them that being strong didn't mean towering over others, it meant knowing when to lift someone up. The bullies nodded, chastened but grateful for forgiveness they didn't feel they deserved. The headmaster stepped forward, placing a firm hand on the veteran's shoulder, thanking him for teaching a lesson no classroom could. Then he addressed the entire courtyard, calling the boy forward. In front of everyone, he announced that the boy's courage and resilience represented the academy's true values. The cadets cheered, not because they were told to, but because they believed it. The boy stood taller, pride swelling in his chest like a rising tide. As the day ended, the veteran returned to his sweeping, but something had changed. Cadets approached him with respect, greeting him with nods and sir, acknowledging him not as an old janitor, but as a soldier who had earned every salute. The small boy stayed beside him for a while, sweeping along with him, each stroke of the broom echoing the beginning of his own journey. The veteran watched him with quiet satisfaction, knowing that sometimes the strongest heroes are simply the ones who choose to keep going. And somewhere deep inside the academy grounds, a legend continued, sweeping floors, shaping futures, and proving that even the smallest dream can grow into something extraordinary.